What is a single price company? Well, the Corte Inglés, for instance. You do not go to the Corte Inglés to haggle. How much is the television set? 1,000. How about 800? No. 900? No. Either you pay 1,000 or you can forget it. Well, someone might say, Professor, I don't see the entrepreneurial process working there. Well, it is working, and in exactly the same way as I have explained here. We just don't see it. Single price companies, department stores, have a highly sophisticated sales department, as does Zara, for example. It is computerized, so managers know for certain what has been sold each day. And if the stock is growing and little is selling, a mysterious hand will immediately change everything during the night for the next day, and vice versa. If the stock is dwindling, managers will either order more or raise the price. They work by trial and error in a constant attempt to find out the subjective valuations of the marginal pairs. Ultimately, the marginal pairs determine the price. Why has this institutional system of determining the price prevailed? Because it saves a lot of time and the considerable costs that would be involved if we had to negotiate by haggling case by case every time we bought something. The important thing to realize is that ultimately the price arises from the subjective valuations of the human beings who participate, specifically the marginal pairs, and that those subjective valuations arise from marginal utility. Thus, Böhm-Bawerk defines the price in the following way. He says the price is the result in the market of the reciprocal impact of subjective valuations of goods and of media of exchange, the reflection of our subjective valuations, which we place on goods through the law of marginal utility, and on money. The reflection of those subjective valuations in the market is the market price. The price emerges through the processes we have analyzed, according to their different types. Also, remember, the only subjective valuations which are relevant are those of the marginal pairs. The valuations of the excluded pairs are completely irrelevant, as are those of the included pairs with a greater capacity to buy or sell. I could be a multimillionaire willing to pay 10,000 euros for a loaf of bread, but in the end, I would pay the same as you for a loaf of bread. This is because the only valuations that affect the market, are relevant, and determine the price, are those of the marginal pairs, the last people to buy and sell, those who do so with the least interest. And this is wonderful, dear students, because not only does it spare us a lot of effort, but also, and above all, in two-sided competition, it protects people who lack negotiating skills. As you will remember, in an isolated exchange, there is a wide range within which the price can be set, and the direction in which the price moves depends on the entrepreneurial alertness of each party. Well, I could be a complete idiot, or a child with no experience, and the market would still protect me, because in the end, I would pay the same price as everybody else, more or less, and it would be set by those with the least interest in closing a deal. If I had an intense interest in buying, and the two-sided competition process did not exist, I would end up paying a lot, unless I hid my interest. Like, do you remember our example, the man who falls in love with the house? Well, if I had a strong interest in selling, I would end up selling for very little, like the inconsolable widow being threatened by the bank with foreclosure. Nevertheless, thanks to the market process of two-sided competition, both sides are protected by the process itself, and no one needs to have any special negotiating skills. There is no need to haggle, and in the end, everyone pays the same price, which is determined by the subjective valuations of the marginal pairs, the only valuations relevant to our examples. Here is another interesting point. Though I chose to explain isolated exchanges first, and then auctions, and then one-sided competition among sellers, and finally two-sided competition, the most general case is that of two-sided competition, where there are various buyers and sellers. The other three cases, the first three, are particular cases within the general one, though I began in reverse order, because it is much more illustrative from a teaching standpoint. If the market is large, if instead of 10 potential buyers and 8 potential sellers, as we imagined, there are 180 1,800, 10,800, 100,000 and 80,000, 1,800,000, and so on, the larger the market is, the narrower the range determined by the subjective valuations of the marginal pairs, because the overlaps tend to approach each other, and so the price tends to be set at a point rather than within a range. Now remember that the market is always discrete. There is never an infinite number. And let us not be deceived by the illusion that prices are determined by curves which seem to intersect at a point, and that the price is always a point. No, prices always fluctuate within a range, which can be broader or narrower. All I am saying is that the broader the market is, in other words, the more potential buyers and sellers there are, the narrower the range will be. But even in markets where there are many, thousands and thousands of buyers and sellers, for example, the stock market, the price is not set at a fixed point. It fluctuates almost every minute. We cannot say, today's closing price for Santander stock was €15 per share. No, it was between 14.80 and 15.10. It's just that the broader or larger the market is, the narrower the price range tends to be. In our example, we supposed each person wanted to buy a horse, or each horse owner wanted to sell a horse. But in real life, many times it happens that one person has several units of a good, and therefore he may simultaneously occupy several of the places we explained in the table the day before yesterday. So, perhaps to be more accurate, instead of referring to the last or the marginal pairs in terms of people, we should refer to the marginal pairs in terms of units. The last unit bought, the first unit excluded, regardless of the people behind it, because the same person may occupy various places if he has several units available. Okay. Also, remember the law of marginal utility in accordance with the division of labour, the poorly named law of the division of labour. In a modern economy, we tend to specialise, and each of us produces so many of those goods we specialise in producing that, in accordance with the law of marginal utility, the subjective valuation we place on our good as sellers is zero. In all the cases in which this happens, and there are many, the side of the seller becomes irrelevant, and as long as the good is scarce in relative terms, that is, that in general demand exceeds supply, it is the marginal buyer, the last person to buy, who determines the market price. Granted, it is a simplification to say that the marginal pairs are reduced to nothing more than the marginal buyer if the seller values her goods at zero, because, by the law of marginal utility, since she is specialized in a specific process, she does not value at all what she produces. The shirt maker has so many shirts, thousands, that she does not value them at all. So, who determines the price? Well, the marginal buyer. Because though the shirt maker has thousands of shirts, there are hundreds of thousands of people who would pay for a shirt. There are not enough shirts. There is a market price, and it is set by the marginal, the last buyer. Notice the distaste with which I, as a buyer, might think, should I buy this shirt or not? Meh, yes, no, and then reluctantly, oh, all right, I'll buy it, but only because I've got nothing better to do. It's not that I like shopping. I'll take it. On top of that, I hesitate to hand over the money. Well, I, the marginal buyer, always set the price for everything. And who exactly is the marginal buyer? We do not know. You have probably been marginal buyers many times, and without knowing it, you have set the price for everyone. We do not know when we are marginal buyers. What we do know in theoretical terms is that the person who turns out to be the marginal buyer is the one who, without knowing it, determines the price for everyone. He tends to determine the price for everyone in this dynamic process. Now for the last essential idea. Economists usually explain price determination as follows. They say, let us suppose there is a demand curve. Here we measure the price, and here the quantity. It is obvious that as the price goes down, people demand more, and as the price goes up, people demand less. And here is the supply curve, which is the opposite. As the price goes up, sellers supply more. As the price goes down, they supply less. Well, economists say the market price is determined by the intersection of the two curves. This is the market price. And they explain, if it were higher, supply would exceed demand, and therefore the price would tend to go down. And if the price were lower, demand would exceed supply, and the price would tend to go up. That is the way they explain it, and students swallow it. They all take notes and go home satisfied, thinking they have understood everything. Well, dear students, all of this is wrong. None of this explains anything. With a little critical thought, you will understand right away. What we must explain is how the market price is arrived at. Well, with this procedure, we are assuming that what we want to explain is already given. In other words, the point is already there, where the curves intersect. And when professors tell you that if the price is higher, it falls, and if it is lower, it rises, that is very easy for them to say, because what they want to explain is already there, and so they haven't really explained anything. Furthermore, the supply and demand curves do not actually exist, among other reasons, because human beings do not have in their heads the information necessary to construct them. We do not know what we are willing to buy at hypothetical prices that have nothing to do with the one we expect in reality. And what's more, the shape of these curves is irrelevant. The shape does not matter. If the curves intersect at the same point, the price will be the same. What I want to tell you is that, first, the price is a historical ratio of exchange that emerges in the genetic causal market process at the very end. Second, human beings value goods creatively. As a result of the division of labor and the law of marginal utility, we tend to place a very low value on what we have, and a high one on what others have. And third, this attracts us like a magnet to exchanges, because we entrepreneurially realize that we come out ahead if we make them, and if we become aware that in a certain situation there is equality in opposite subjective valuations, we immediately agree to an exchange in which a price is set. The price is the end point of the whole process. In contrast, here the price is presented as the starting point. That is, here the price appears as the independent variable which determines everything, when that is not the case. It is not that prices mysteriously rise and fall as if by magic, and nobody can explain why, and if they go down we buy more, and if they go up we buy less. It's the other way around. If we buy a lot of a good, if we have an intense desire for something, and we buy a lot of it, the last thing that happens is that the price rises. If we do not value the good, or there is a large supply of it, if we decide to supply a lot or buy little, then the price falls. The price comes last. The price is always the dependent variable, for there are no functions in economics. I have already explained it over and over again. It is a genetic causal process. Therefore, this entire mainstream theory is unsound. It is static. It constructs them. Moreover, it presupposes what it is meant to explain. The point of intersection is already there, and that is what we want to explain. Let us find it. Furthermore, these theorists commit the error of assuming that the independent variable we parametrically adapt to is the price, when what really happens is just the opposite. Now let us consider the individual determinants of price. Specifically, there are 6. We are going to look at 3 individual determinants of price on the side of demand and 3 determinants on the side of supply. On the side of demand, the first determinant is the number of demands for a good. The economic law is very simple. Other things being equal, ceteris paribus, the greater the demand that is, the number of demands for a good, the higher the price will tend to be, and vice versa. Other things being equal, the smaller the number of people who demand a good, the lower the price will tend to be. This is the first individual determinant, and it is obvious. That is why advertising is so important, to make oneself known. So, let's say I'm a very pretty girl, I'm very attractive, I'm worth a lot, I'm very honest, I have solid principles. Basically, I am the ideal woman. Still, if I hardly ever go out and nobody knows me, then I'm going to end up a spinster. So, what do I need? Suitors, lots of suitors. Therefore, in a more or less subtle way, the girl must be advertised, or advertise herself. She must make herself look beautiful, etc. Then, other things being equal, the greater the demand, the number of people who demand a good, the higher the price will tend to be. That is why advertising is necessary. But the number of demands is not the only important factor. Also key, and this is the second individual determinant of price on the side of demand, is the subjective valuation buyers make of a good. Other things being equal, the higher the subjective valuation buyers make of a good, the higher the price will tend to be. And the lower the subjective valuation buyers make of a good, the lower the price will tend to be. In other words, marginal utility. The purpose of advertising is double. First, it is aimed at attracting the interest of many people. And second, a good is advertised in an appealing manner, so that people will value it highly. The result? Someone who advertises expects, therefore, to be able to sell at a higher price. Christmas is coming up, and soon we'll be flooded with perfume commercials, won't we? What are perfume and cologne commercials like? Well, to start with, they are shown again and again, so that lots of people see them. And then, for instance, cologne commercials almost give the impression that if a man uses a certain brand, 100 girls will fall at his feet every day. What happens to the price of perfumes and colognes? It goes up. We could also talk about car commercials. Usually, physical things, which can be touched, like a car, are advertised with spiritual ideas. Cars are associated with fast driving, luxury, making our neighbour envious, strength, and vice versa. Spiritual things are advertised with something that can be touched. For example, the solvency of a bank. How is it advertised? Well, with magnificent buildings. This must be a super solvent bank. Look at everything it owns. Maybe it has feet of clay. Do you see what I mean? The purpose is always to attract the interest of many people and prompt them to make a high valuation. The third determinant of price on the side of demand is the subjective value buyers place on money, the medium of exchange. I think you will all grasp this immediately. If a buyer hardly values money at all, do you think the price of what he buys will tend to rise or fall? It will tend to rise because he lets go of money very easily. In contrast, if the buyer is very stingy because he likes to save money and does not like to let go of it, then he will demand little and the price will tend to fall. We could cite thousands of examples to illustrate this determinant. For instance, Asturian mining villages. When miners get paid, and miners get a handsome salary, when they get paid, the price charged in bars, the price of money, of beer, in brothels, etc., goes up substantially. When the miners run out of money, it goes down. We know what this is like too, the post-Christmas crunch. What happens at the end of January? Well, at the beginning of the month, you all drive back to the university in your parents' cars. The food at home is fabulous. Mom serves meat and fish, etc. But by the 15th of January, it's spaghetti, 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 spaghetti. The car stays in the garage, and everybody takes the metro. Well, parallel with these three individual determinants of price on the side of buyers, there are another three on the side of sellers. The fourth determinant is the number of units for sale. Again, the economic law is very simple. As the number of units for sale rises, other things being equal, what do you think the price will do? Will it go up or down? If there is an excellent crop and the market is suddenly flooded with potatoes or strawberries, what will the price tend to do? It will tend to go down, and vice versa. If there is a terrible crop, and suddenly considerably fewer units are available, the price will tend to go up. What happens to peaches in January? Where do peaches come from in January? What do you think, Noah? From greenhouses. From where? They come from Chile, or from southern Africa, and they are incredibly expensive. So clearly, the number of units exerts an effect opposite to what we saw on the side of buyers. The fifth determinant is the subjective value sellers place on the good. A seller may place a high subjective value on a good. For instance, this is a Van Gogh painting I inherited from my family. To be honest, I'm only selling it to you because I'm in a desperate situation. It has enormous sentimental value to me. Well, the price will tend to be high. Now, most sellers are affected by the law of marginal utility and the division of labor, which we have already talked about. Most sellers specialize in something, and they hardly value at all what they make. Thus, their marginal utility is zero. The marginal buyer determines the price for everyone. The sixth determinant is the subjective value sellers place on money. If a seller is in great need of money, what does she do? You have seen signs in the stores in January, right? After Christmas sale, or going out of business sale, or inventory sale. What are those meant to communicate to the public? I am desperate for money. I will buy money at any price. Money is tremendously valuable to me. In a nutshell, the price will fall. During the sales, what happens to prices? They go down. If the seller is in great need of money and places a high value on it, prices will tend to be low. In contrast, if the seller has plenty of money and needs no more, she will not sell unless the price is very high. Those are the individual determinants of price. The seventh section is devoted to the law of cost. I would like to make this very clear to you, because intuitively, many people believe costs determine prices. They believe it because there is a kind of pricing mechanism in stores, in the commercial world, that appears to support that theory. Imagine I own a shoe store, and I buy shoes wholesale from a distributor for 100 euros. Well, I add a margin of 50, and I sell them for 150. And everyone says, that's very reasonable. So, what is the conclusion? If shoe costs rise, prices will tend to rise. And therefore, costs appear to determine prices. Nothing could be further from the truth. It is completely false. And now, with a little critical thought, you will grasp this immediately. If costs determined prices, there would be no entrepreneurial problem. All entrepreneurs would have a guarantee that they could recover via prices any costs incurred. The so-called law of cost is absolutely false, because the causality is exactly the opposite. It is not costs which determine prices, but market prices which determine costs. The genetic causal relationship is as follows. Human beings have a series of value scales. Depending on those, a market price is arrived at through the process we have studied. Entrepreneurs estimate the market price that will result from value scales and be set in the market tomorrow. They try to find out what it will be, to get a jump on it, to make an appraisal, an estimate, a valuation. And depending on that, today they decide to buy factors of production, and therefore to incur costs, to produce that good. And all the time, they expect to incur costs lower than the price they will obtain. Therefore, it is the prices entrepreneurs estimate a priori which determine costs. It is as if we held a carrot in front of a donkey, and the donkey followed the carrot. The carrot is the price, and the donkey the costs. Costs always follow prices. This is a process in which entrepreneurs anticipate the future. They try to gauge, as if they represented tomorrow's consumers, what types of goods consumers will demand in the future, with what characteristics and at what price. And depending on that, they take the plunge today and incur costs in an environment of uncertainty. Many times they hit the mark and obtain entrepreneurial profits, but other times they make a mistake and sustain heavy losses. Costs never determine prices. The opposite is true. Prices determine costs. Huerta offered the following typical example. A hat is not worth €100 because it costs 90 to produce and the storekeeper adds a profit margin of 10. That is getting it backward. Instead, because the storekeeper believes he will be able to sell the hat for 100 monetary units, he is willing to incur costs of up to 90 to produce it. Take note, because in the future, many of you will be involved in the production of films. If costs determine prices, it would be a cinch to be an entrepreneur. You would take on any unlimited amount of costs to produce a film. €50 million. Why only 50? Why not 100 or 200? €1 billion? €10 billion? One hell of a movie! Since costs determine prices, there's no problem. We'll get it all back later. No. Therefore, the law of cost is false. Prices determine costs. Costs follow prices. It's obvious, really. Costs are simply the prices of the factors of production, and the factors of production have a price because they are useful for producing consumer goods people value. The causality is very clear. First comes the consumer good, which is valued and has a price, and that is what tends to determine the costs entrepreneurs will be willing to incur to produce that consumer good.